Hello and welcome to Zero to Traction, the podcast about how first-time founders create companies at scale. I'm one of your regular co-hosts, JDM, aka Josh David Miller, and here with my other regular co-host, the inimitable Cameron Law. Cameron, how are you today?
I don't know how to respond because I don't know what inimitable means. So nonetheless, I will say I'm glad to be back in the studio, and I'll plead my ignorance in relation to that very sophisticated word. Oftentimes we say language matters as a startup founder. So maybe you can enlighten me of my caveman-like knowledge of what that word means, and then we can hop into our discussion here.
It's a good thing. Can we just say that it's a good thing? I mean, I don't know what to say. So I think that the way that you would typically describe inimitable is one of a kind. Like it means unique. But in a way, like
Just like the
it,
word. Just like the
im,
word.
well, no, like think imitable as in like imitatable, imitable. Inimitable means unable to be imitated.
Very good.
So it's like people say imitatable, but the actual word is imitable. Anyway, point of the story is you are one of a kind, and I'm happy to have you as my
Awesome.
co-host.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be back in the studio, and I appreciate the accomplishment, and means more now that I understand what the what the word means. Nonetheless,
Well, I mean, that's a good segue into what we're talking about today, because we're talking all about relationships and the number of ways that shows up, but actually in a really important concept in the way that we think about relationships. So we're calling this the kind of capital you didn't know you needed edition of the Zero to Traction podcast. And I know, Cameron, this is something that comes up for you probably a little bit more than it does come up for me. It comes up for me all the time, but it comes up for you even more by the nature of, you work at one of the entrepreneurship hubs, if you will, in the ecosystem. And that means that if we were to draw out like a web of relationships between people, you personally, but the Carlson Center more broadly, are a dense node in that. And so I'll come back to my triangle of trust in a minute, but maybe you could just kick us off with like why you use this concept of relational capital.
yeah. Well, awesome. Well, thanks for teeing us off in relation to this conversation around really social capital and how you navigate that as a founder. And I think some high level context I wanted to start with is, as an entrepreneur, you're jumping into really this ecosystem of support and really thinking intentionally about how you're going to navigate all of the resources that are out there. And that's not just like the programs and accelerators, but it's the people that run them, it's the mentors and all of the individuals that are investing time and energy into the overall ecosystem to support you as a founder and getting from point A to B as quick as possible. And that's ultimately, when you think of your lifestyle of a entrepreneur and how you're going to get to success, is how can you do that as quickly as possible? And that's being able to navigate those relationships as quickly as possible, but in a way that you're not burning bridge to bridge as you're ultimately engaging in the resources and people in the ecosystem. And so, I think of, being on the other side of the coin and someone who's serving founders and bringing, programs to life to support entrepreneurs and, realizing their entrepreneurial dreams, is oftentimes it's not just the, guest speaker who's coming in to ultimately speak and maybe, bring in some subject matter expertise or be a SME around a particular topic, but really this mentorship and advising network that helps you get some of that in-depth experience and know-how as you're navigating that particular journey. And so one of the things that you have to be thinking about is like, there's also a connection point with, say, a program director or someone who's leading that, has that established relationship to bring those people to the table. Yes, they're maybe doing that out of goodwill and wanting to be there to support, but there's still an ask on the other side in that relationship that's being brokered is ultimately, relies on the trust that that mentor or advisor has with that program. The founders going to ultimately utilize that time and energy in the right way. And so, one of the things that, you often find is like, oh, can you make this connection to me? And it's like, okay, well, where are you in relation to the sphere of influence with the person, say, running the program or engaging in that network? Is it something that you've, done the homework to actually, say you're in a program and, there were some action items to be done. Did you go do those things to demonstrate that, hey, this is a founder that's going to go and ultimately take advantage in the right way of this time and opportunity that they have with a mentor and advisor? And so, I think overall there's a lot to dive in here, but maybe JDM, I'll turn that mess back to you and kind of see,
Yeah.
where we take it from here.
No, I think that's perfect. So there's one thing I want to say, and then I'll maybe take us down a path that I choose when I start the sentence. So the first thing is like you kind of teed up this idea like of the triangle of trust, right? And the idea here is that along your journey, right, there's going to be a number of other people that you're going to want to connect with, and some of those connections are going to be organic, and some of them are not. Some of them are going to be very intentional. But you're going to need all these people along the way. You're going to need co-founders. You're going to need team members that you hire. You're going to need mentors and advisors. You're going to need boards of directors. You're going to need investors, and a number of other people that we could get into here. But like this, the relationships are going to be something you're gonna have to acquire over time, and you don't know everybody. That's just self-explanatory. We don't know everybody, and so it ends up in this game of A knows B and B knows C, and A really wants to know C, but they don't know C, but they know B, right? And so that's where the triangle of trust comes in, because if you think about, you draw a line between A and B to B and C, that can form the connection to C and A, right? And so like through that little, like that, I don't know you, but I know this person and they vouch for you. All right. And that's, I think, a lot of like, we call the triangle of trust, because they trust that person, which means that they trust that when that person introduces you to them, that they are doing this in a way that creates value for all involved. They're not going to waste your time. And that's just like the idea of you're spending social capital in order to put your name out there as vouching for this other person. And like you're literally expending capital when you do that. And so I think that that's where it becomes really important to understand the nature of the ask. And I think that that's probably something maybe we can come back to at the end. Like we can kind of explore the relationships here and how all that works with it. Maybe we come back to like, how do you form a really good ask when you want to know somebody? I think that'd be a great way to kind of end the conversation. But so winding it back to make a mess out of this. So I started mentioning all these people that you're going to need access to along the way. And it's like concentric circles. First person you need access to is probably a co-founder. Actually, that's not true. The first person you probably need access to is a customer. And this matters here too. Like this is when, you either know some people because you're working in this space. And so you start talking to them, or, you start talking to other people who might know them anyway. You get in front of the first set. That can either be, 0 relationships, or it might go through 1 relationship. So now you're already leveraging that triangle of trust and spending social capital. But then once you talk to them, then you're starting to say, okay, do you know anybody else, who also experiences this problem that I can talk to? So you're asking the people you just met, is this experience positive enough for you that you're willing to expend some social capital connecting you to someone else? So already, boom, customers, day one. Then you go to co-founders, right? You're going to need co-founders. Eventually, you're going to need teammates. You're going to have to form advisors along the way. The advisors are going to either be formal advisors that maybe you put on a board of advisors, or there might just be people that you meet along the way that run some programs. Some of the people that Cameron brings in, to the Carlson Center to participate in or run some program or give some talk. And so they're giving you a piece of knowledge that you didn't have before that you wanted. And then, of course, formal advisors, boards of directors, and of course, investors, right? You're not going to get all of your investors through relationships, but the ones that you do get through relationships are more valuable because, as we say, it's not what you know, it's who you know at the end of the day, because who you know will also give you what you need to know, if that makes sense. You can't use knowledge to manifest people, but you can use people to manifest knowledge, I guess I got there eventually.
Right. Yeah.
Coherent point. JDM's genius. Moving on to the next subject there. So like maybe like break this down a little bit, like and talk about relationship, like some of these relationships in a bit more specific sense. Like maybe we could talk about the arc of some of these relationships. How, like when somebody is saying like, oh, I'm looking for, this is a pretty common case for you and I. Somebody will come up to us, they're looking for a co-founder or they're looking for an advisor, right? Like there's a technical founder in our network who is just spending what now amounts to a couple of months like trying to find an advisor in this deep tech space that he's working in. And that's like a long and arduous, journey just to get to like this advisor. So maybe we can talk a little bit about how some of those, like, how do you go from the process of I need access to X to finding that person X?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple ways to approach. I think one is just actively plugging into the ecosystem. I think oftentimes founders try to do things alone and then they come out of nowhere with kind of like, hey, I'm a founder and you said your center supports people, can you introduce me to this person? I see you're connected. And I was like,
The
this is the
CEO of a
first time
Fortune
I've met
50.
you. I don't know anything that you're working on. I've never seen you at an event or anything of that nature. Right. And so I think a first step is like plugging in to build a relationship with the ecosystem. And I know oftentimes entrepreneurs are hesitant to share what they're working on for, protection of ideas and things like that. And maybe I'll have you tackle that a little bit later, JDM, if you want. But I think, one of those things is when you plug into programs and events, so say like Startup Happy Hour, you meet other founders and then you meet people that are trying to ultimately build those bridges from programs to people that are ultimately getting things started. And so there's this relationship that's ultimately built. But also oftentimes at those events are those mentors and advisors. And so they see you and ultimately build that relationship. And so I think that like early arc is one, like introducing yourself and what you're working on. So then people can actually know that you're not just kind of coming out of thin air to ultimately come in with an ask, right? That's a very like take mentality. Then let me give and show up and ultimately support. And then, when there's that time to ultimately say, hey, I need this resource. And there's also then, if you're a part of a program, so say you join our Lean Innovator cohort or the Startup Warm-Up Pitch or Roseville Rising, whatever programs out there that you're engaging, there's now an investment that those program leads have made in you because you're a part of their cohort and they want to continue to see your success. Because your success also begets their success as a program lead, right? And so there's that kind of a established relationship. And so I think that early arc that you see is, as you mentioned, was like, how do you get access to customers? And maybe at the idea or, even early stages before your pre-product are, customer interviews and validation, right? And so using that relationship to say, hey, do you know anyone that has these problems? Oftentimes we even see this in like our startup challenge, right? It was like, hey, who has, we use the space of the program to say, anyone know anyone that has this particular pain point, right? And then like, it was like, okay, there's 10 people in this room. And now that's where that network itself just elicited that ability to do so. And they're willing to take that conversation because you've also both signed up to do the same program and investing the same time and energy. And there's that social capital and trust that's built by, hey, we're founders that are here building together and ultimately building those relationships. And so I think that those are some of the grounding elements. One of the challenges that I often see is, maybe there's a connection on LinkedIn or something and people don't, ultimately they say, oh yeah, I know Cameron through this thing. And they outreach to someone and say, hey, I'm a connection. And then likely that connection that's outreach to will reach out to that person that got connected, right? And it's like, oh, I didn't know they were
Fact
going
check.
to do that, right? Or how well do you know this founder? And this actually just happened to you and I when we were up in Roseville, right? Someone had reached out like, hey, do you know this founder? And, they referenced you and a program that they engaged in. And so it's like, that comes back. And so if we're not necessarily that you have to like go through us, but it was like, hey, if we don't know where your strategy for going forward is, and we get kind of side swiped out of like, hey, I'm not sure that, you're ready for that stage of support. We better kind of maybe allocated the right placed resource to support you in that process. So
I
I'll
think
pause
it's
there.
like really, no, I think it's really important, like what you just said, because there's a natural consequence there. It's like that, like I know the conversations that you're referring to. Like you and I were just having a conversation with a third party, a friend that we all know and trust, and they were just like, oh, by the way, I spoke to so and so. They were, they said they were in your program. They asked the opinion. It's not like we're going to keep our mouth shut in that, right? And that doesn't mean that like we're gonna like bad mouth or anything like that. What I mean is that we're either gonna say we don't remember or here's our off the cuff, recollections and impressions. And that was what we did. We just gave our off the cuff recollections and impressions. because we had no other preparation. Whereas if we knew that this person was trying to, it was like, this is my strategy, I'm going to go out and talk to these people, whatever, then when that came up in conversation, we would know how to help facilitate that behind the scene, that there was that triangle of trust conversation that was just happening behind the scene. It was happening organically and you were never there. And because you did not prep us for that, like, I doubt that that was as valuable an encounter as it could have been for them. Right. So I just wanted to kind of double click on that.
Double click. There you go. Yeah. And it's, I think there's a fine balance, right? Cause it's like, I respect the like hustle to like go seek the resources and like move through the process. And by no means, should there be like, oh, like you have to go through this channel in order to like
Right.
build
We don't want to be
relationships and network.
gatekeepers.
Right. Exactly. But it's more so of like, you know, if you're just using that specific relationship without like any context of like that person being a part of that established connection, then when that conversation could happen, it might not go the way that you intended it because we, were just, random conversation. And it's like, oh, I wasn't prepared to know what your goals or your next steps or intentions with ultimately engaging that audience going
Right.
forward is. So
it's the help me help you. It's
right.
that,
And
right.
it kind of makes me think back, and we've talked about this on like pitch decks. And I know sometimes we always come back to pitch decks for one element of it, but that's kind of the visual representation of having someone on your advisory board that hasn't agreed to be on your advisory. Like people are going to say like, oh, I know JDM. Like, yeah, he speaks in our
He's
program
my
every year.
advisor.
I'm going to go follow up with him to see if, that's actually someone that's advising you in the way that you said they're advising you. Right. And part of that is like, then, the credibility can be diminished a tad if that's obviously the case that it's not. But if it is, then like, that's tremendous. And, you did all the things that you needed to. So.
Yeah, I think that's great. Good to keep in mind. I just really wanted to emphasize that, we're not talking about gatekeeping. We're like, relationships should be free flowing. And like you said, Cameron, we like and to drive the hustle. This is just about like, if you want to leverage our relationship with other people in the community or anybody's relationship with the community, that person should know that you want to leverage it and to what end, because when it comes time to have that fact checked or when that comes up in conversation, then we're in a much better position to help you get what you want. And if it never comes up, it never comes up, and that's fine. But don't blindside us on that. And we've all been in that position where like I've been listed as an advisor on someone's deck, and I'm like, we had a conversation, bro. Like that was what happened. Like I'm not in it. You can't list me as an advisor for something like that. And and like there's like that lens. The whole point of that is to lend credibility. Like we have these people, on it, and like so when you put my face on your slide, you're spending my social capital. And like, and I'm happy to do that for the companies where I'm actually playing that role. Like that's great. But where I'm not, it's just, it ends up costing you a lot. And once you start burning, those bridges, and once you start getting that reputation for being somebody who's not even necessarily dishonest, like that, definitely don't get that reputation, because that's very hard to recover from. But not a reputation of being dishonest, but a reputation of being immature, right? Of being like you live in this land of make believe, where unserious is that's the word I was looking for. It makes you seem unserious, and nobody like, these are all serious people, even though we all have fun. Like, we're all serious people. We have jobs and careers and goals, and like, we're all serious people, even though I like to think we're a pretty fun community, but like we're serious people, and like, we don't want to spend our time with unserious people.
Right. Yeah. And there's ways to like right size that, right? Like it could be that's more of a initial mentor relationship, which demonstrates
Totally.
like, oh, like the person supporting it versus like the formal advising engagement. And so I think that, there's always a right size way to engage that particular engagement. And I think part of it too is if you set someone up who's not engaging in that element of things, and then you go bring someone on who is more of a formal, say, advisor, then like those aren't right sized in your demonstration of what they're committing to. And so it's like, oh, well, what do you do? It's like, oh, I meet with them on, once a year or whatever. And then like, is that how this other person who has the same, demonstration of their engagement in what you're building, ultimately the same. So
And so like let's move on to like a completely different relationship, but with the same concept, and the one that's I think on every founder's mind, which is investors. And I think that there's a misconception I do want to clear up because we'll spend most of the time talking about it, from the other side, and so I just want to make sure that we kind of get this out of the way. Is that people think that like, oh, you can never get capital unless you know the investors or get somebody to introduce you. That is just not true. That's absolutely not true. It is easier. There's no doubt about that. But like a lot of people don't realize like if you're going to raise a seed round, just a seed round, maybe 500, 750, something's probably sub a million for a seed round for software. You're probably going to pitch at least 50 times just to, somewhere between 50 and 100 times to investors. Like these aren't like, you don't know them all. Like this is not real. Sometimes you're going on a website and you're filling out the little thing that says you want to pitch to them. And like, that's fine. So I don't want to make it seem like you can't be successful without relationships. But that having been said, you're going to form relationships along the way, and those relationships are really valuable. So often what happens when you're not a good fit for an investor that you pitch to, and there's a number of reasons why that could be true. It could be that they just don't like to play in the space that you're playing in. Like it's not against their thesis. It's just like they don't love to make investments in that space. It could be that you're a little too early or a little too late. There's that stage, appropriateness there. There could be, some other reasons, as well, but you might not be a good fit for another reason than they just think you're crap, right? Like that's not necessarily the case. And so when you pitch and you're not a good fit, they will often know because again, community, they will know people that you can go pitch to. And most of the time, if it's for one of those reasons, like, oh, we don't really like to, do the, workplace productivity space. Like that's just not like we just don't love that space. Then if you say, oh, do you know, who should I talk to? Or can you introduce me to, to so-and-so? Most of the time they'll say yes, because like, that's how the world works. And investors make money by having deal flow. Right. And so if they can put you in front of somebody that's looking for people like you, that's win-win. And they actually gain social capital by introducing companies like that. Like even if you start a relationship anonymously, through a website form, it's eventually going to come down to relationships. But I just wanted to like make clear that you can raise capital without knowing all the investors in advance. You will not know all the investors in advance unless you spend all your time in Sandhill or something like that. Because that's just not the way the world works. So I want to say that, but let's talk about like the investor relationship a little bit more. I just kind of wrapped on one particular example off the cuff that I didn't intend to. So I'll turn it back to you. And like when you think about investment and relationships, what first comes to mind?
This is not a direct answer. So take it with, I guess, a grain of salt here, but
that's what I get for not asking a direct question.
The first thing that came to mind was like, at the end of the day, they're people, right? And oftentimes I think sometimes it feels like the relationship turns to be very transactional. It's like, oh, I see you as a resource to money, or I see you as a resource to this connection, right? And at the end of the day, just as we would work with the founder to think of, you need to empathize and understand what your customers' goals are and how you're solving their pain points. The same thing is with an investor, right? Do you understand that they then also have their quote unquote customers or their investors, their LPs, right? And understanding their business model, and that if you're not inside their thesis, then you're not likely a good fit, because they're not going to be able to go to their investment committee to say, hey, let's fund this thing outside of our scope, right? And so it's like truly understanding that, yes, there's, they have capital and, ultimately are deploying it maybe at the right stage. But if we understand that these are individuals that have to go through their own process and they have their own people that are on them about, returning capital to them, we can best see, how to navigate and empathize with that relationship and build those connections. And I think same with, other programs and things that are building those relationships. And there's oftentimes when you think of investment, and we've, I think, talked about this in other discussions, was like, it's not like the Shark Tank where you come and go and do a pitch and you get the $1 million, investment for X%, right? It starts with, hey, I met you at a demo day in a program. You're a mentor who came in and talked about a subject matter. Now I'm actually ready to raise capital, and can we sit down for a half hour over coffee and let me talk to you where we are in relation to progress from the last time I saw you. Then it's like, oh, well, you're actively raising. Can you send us your pitch deck, right? And so it's all of that relationship. It's not just going up to like Mark Cuban and doing a pitch on TV and walking away with the funds, right? And so it's understanding those nuances, I think, are key in relation to like how relationships matter. And there's oftentimes that saying of like, if you ask for advice, you get investment, and if you ask for investment, you get advice. And I think the underlying tones of that is, if you're just coming in for like this transactional, like, hey, this is, I'm in for the money. People, yes, they want to invest the capital and see a return, but they're going to be working with you for a long time, and they want to have that relationship and that trust built to say, hey, when times get tough, are you actually going to share the challenges that you're going through? Because they need to rally additional resources, whether that's human power or connections or relationships, to ensure that that investment is successful, and that investment ultimately in you and your startup. And so really taking that, I think, humanistic approach to say, yes, it is a company and, say venture fund, or it could be a high net worth individual investing in you. And there is that relationship around the financial capital, but there's also that social capital that will ultimately, I think, be one of the key elements that'll push those deals through the in line. So I don't know if I roundabout way to get to an answer there, but
I think
that's how I
so.
look at it in terms of engaging investors and relationship building.
And you also called out a mistake that I think is important. So we've been talking about how to optimize your social capital spend and all that. And one of the quickest ways to not do that is to waste social capital, is to burn social capital. And you mentioned it kind of briefly, so I just wanted to like resurface it again. That you mentioned the context of thesis, right? That particularly if you're working with a fund, they're going to have some type of investment thesis. It was the conditions and mission under which they secured funding from the investors who put money into the fund. Like a high net worth individual, or an angel investor type, they may not have a thesis. They probably have some soft thesis that's unwritten. If they have preferences
Not
and
if
things
they
like
did
that.
AngelCon. We have them run.
Okay, well, those who are lucky enough to go through programs with Cameron maybe have a more formal thesis, but most I talk to don't, and a lot of it is based on the founder and some prior experience and stuff like that. So, but everybody starts somewhere. But anyway, if you're dealing with somebody who has a thesis, like the quickest way to make a clown out of yourself and burn social capital is to try to be pitching to somebody whose thesis does not include you. So like here's an example, like you're in a like a biomed space, and you're doing a deep tech biomedical device kind of thing. And then you go pitch Moneta that focuses on B2B SaaS, right? Like it's just like there's a break there. And I know they do more than that, but I'm like giving an example, like that if they have a thesis that puts these boundaries about it, like those are public, that's easily discoverable. And so if you start, like you're trying to get investment from somebody who doesn't fit within that, then you're just making yourself look silly. And the same thing goes to people, like know your audience, know who you're talking to. And there's nothing wrong with talking to those people, particularly from a relationship perspective and like forming those bonds and relationships. But that's where, so again, go back to Cameron, what you said before, it's that like, seeking advice can get you investment, and seeking investment can get you advice. I think it's that little trap there. But anyway, so I want to call out that. And then we said we'd come back to you. So I wanted to like round back to you with something we started with, which is if somebody does want to reach out to somebody through you, and they say, let's say that they do have a little bit of a relationship with you, not necessarily like a robust one, but you've had a conversation, they've told you what they're working on, they didn't come in with this take first mentality, and they say, do you know so-and-so? And you say, yes, I know so-and-so. And they say, can you introduce me to so-and-so? how does that go well?
Yeah, you really great question. And I think usually it goes the best when there's a clearer ask and like, is it, for that person's time? Is it an introduction for you to just have an introductory conversation? Or are you going to like go straight in and like pitching them for funding or like become a large customer for their B2B play, right? And so it's understanding like what the context of that introduction means on the other side, right? So I think that that's a really key component. And then making that process as simple as possible. So it's not that I have to then go to your website and, get the right pitch. Cause it's like, if I want to do it right, I want to introduce you and your company in the right way. And so having, I think in our investment readiness, we have like the forwardable email. So like, what is your business? What are some of the recent milestones that you've created? So when I, make that introduction, it's seamless in terms of like, I don't have to go do extra work to figure out the right pitch or like, me craft. I don't know that you want me to craft your one sentence pitch on what your business is, because I'm probably not going to do it justice to what it obviously is for you and your business. And so I think the key things is like, what is the clear ask? Because that's ultimately what's going to be the anchor of, hey, the two of you should connect. This is what that will be. And then the other thing that like I really want to ensure is that like as soon as I send that you're following up and like engaging that conversation and not waiting for the other person to respond first, right? Like you should really be leading like, hey, thank you for that introduction. Would love to find time on your calendar or whatever that might be. So those are kind of the three things. I think one is right sizing the ask, and like if it's we're doing a one-on-one call and like figuring that out, maybe we walk away from that like, oh, what that specific ask is. But if it's an outreach connection, being clear on what your intentions are in that, building that relationship and having that next conversation with that individual. And then two, making it as easy as possible. And three is following up on that. And this is, maybe this is personal, but it's also nice to know, like, did the connection go well or not? Like, sometimes that follow-up of, you hear like down the line was like, oh, that introduction you made like led to raising money or becoming a customer. Like those are things that like sustain the relationship building going forward versus them finding out, down the line that led to some outcomes. And so thinking about again that like it's all about the connections and relationships, and so maintaining that on the other side is a really key element as well.
All right. Well, that's a perfect way to end this. That's how to do it right. So we'll kind of stop there. We're basically out of time here, but this would not be Zero to Traction if we did not end with some frivolity. I come armed with a non-television, non-film related frivolity today. A frivolous thought, I guess I'm supposed to say. So did you want me to kick things off?
Sure. Well, now the one I had was like, it's not like a TV show, but I only really watch them on TV because I don't have the capital to buy tickets all the time to their games. So
No, I wasn't knocking TV film. I just meant like every frivolous thought I've brought for the last few month has been some type of TV show or movie. So no, like kick us off with
sure.
that.
Yeah. So mine's pretty brief was, King season is underway. They're 0-2 to start. And I'm really loving the way the team's looking. They've had two really tough losses. So they've like lost in the last, minute or so of the game. And they play tonight. So I'm excited to watch them. But I think, the frivolous thought there is just, I'm excited to see the team, but they're kind of not, closing the deals of these games. And so I'm hoping that, they continue a trajectory of growth and ultimately bring home some dubs. And hopefully we have another playoff year because, we love it as Kings fans for sure.
Light the beam, baby.
Light the beam. Yeah, we got to find the light the beam for startup success. We light the beam when a good connection's made and it turns it into something.
Awesome. Well, for my frivolous thought, so I as you know, Cameron, there's a lot. Anybody who spends time with me knows like I'm a fidget toy guy. I've got fidget toys, different kinds, and so this is my object lesson. So this is the specs. So Cameron, this was a gift from you. And so for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you can see it. But those of you who are listening to the podcast, it's these tiny little magnetic balls that are maybe 2-3 millimeters. Like they're really small, and they come in this mesh. And because they're all magnetic, you can push and squeeze and move them around to do all sorts of things with the fidget toy, and they don't fall apart, and it just like stays together. Like if you were to like throw it against something, it'd probably like enough to break the magnetic force. But otherwise, like I've never had one drop on the ground. Like they just stay together. Super awesome. Comes a little cube. Also has a ruler and everything else to do it. That's not the object lesson. No, that's not my frivolous thought. So my frivolous thought is I was playing with this thing, and so I thought it was so cool because my favorite fidget toy now. I was telling my wife about it, who is a therapist, a mental health therapist, and she has like this putty. It's called thinking putty, like Crazy Aaron's thinking putty, which is it's like literally like adult silly putty, but it helps people to process, particularly if they're internal processors, they can work this while they process. So I told her, she goes, "Oh, I'm going to get some." So she goes on Amazon and orders a thing of specs. And so here's hers. So this is Specs, same brand, SPEKS, for those of you who are thinking like Specs period. This one comes in this fancy tin, right? And you can see here and here, these are not multiple like millimeters. These are ones that are like shaped like an ibuprofen tablet or something. They're, close to 3/4 of a centimeter long. And here's here's my little frivolous thought. These suck. These ones blow. Like they do not stay together at all. I just dropped some on the ground. Just like doing it. And when I got them out of the tin, you could see there's some in the tin still. So like she told me that, she goes, "This is not the same fit. These are just awful." So I do highly recommend the specs. But if you do get the specs, get the specs mini. They're awesome and I love them. One of the best fidget toys ever. The giant specs are shit, and those are to be avoided at all costs.
That's awesome, mate. Yeah. Well, hey, there you go. Instagram advertising got me, and I'm glad you like them.
I do. Thank you. I do love it. And I have to find a bunch of small magnets on the floor before my toddler eats them.
Yeah. It's like, why are they sticky to his stomach?
I think I'm gonna have to go like to the garage. My office is carpet. I'm gonna go to the garage and get like that. I have like this magnet thing used to pick up like loose screws and nails that are on the floor because you just hover over it. I'm gonna have to take that to my carpeted office to get these things off the floor.
That's awesome.
But anyway, that's all the time that we have here for Zero Traction. Thanks for hanging out with us for another week. If you haven't already, take a moment to like, subscribe, follow, leave us a review, or share it with a friend. Really appreciate it. Helps us get into the hands of or to the podcatchers of other founders who are looking to launch and scale their company. So we really appreciate your vote of confidence in doing that. Thank you so much. And thank you, Cameron, for hanging out with me yet another week for an episode.
There we go. It's my pleasure. And we look forward to continuing our conversations. And please do engage so we can continue to hop on and provide content to you. So feel free to share ideas on topics. We're always looking for things to discuss. It's not super hard, but we also want to make sure we're tackling the areas of focus that you need support with. So we'll see you next time. And thanks again for the time, JDM.
All right. Add us with your ideas. All right.
There we go.
See you guys.
Sure.
See you, Cameron. Bye.